Supportables, it happened. Not only was this kind of our rivalry week or in-house competition week, we did have a fall from grace from our previously undefeated champions. We also had, hopefully, a well-balanced approach to fantasy and real life where we all took our wins and losses in stride because there certainly was, let's say, maybe a gender dominance in this particular one. Just a rough week for women, I think, in general. But anyway, let's not get into that. Let's get into some NFL scores and then our scores and see how we fare in the league after week 9. Week 9 in the NFL is always a funky one because for them in the actual league, they're on the second half, but they still have a fair bit to play for. In fantasy, we only have a few more weeks realistically, and you're going to start to notice over the next couple weeks that some teams may even start to clinch, which means the playoff run is very much in full swing, making the trade deadline actually a really, really interesting timing for us. Now, trades we've talked about for the last couple weeks, but this particular week, right by the deadline, we've seen in the last little bit tons of talent change hands. Now, sometimes these are defensive talents, and that's something to pay attention to, obviously, for our team defenses and matchups, etc. But honestly, we're going to be swung by some of the talent that's going through. Now, there was a running back I can think of, but mainly this is wide receivers. But just in general, this kind of gives us an idea of who the buyers and who are the sellers. Obviously, in fantasy, there's a few different ways this can be of value. If a team trades away their number one and you have their number two, I mean, even though we're going to talk about the trade away teams in a second here, there's always fringe benefit. I mean, they got to score sometime. But then obviously, if you got the person, it's always the question of whether or not they can mesh. Now, if you happen to have Hopkins, obviously you're pretty pumped. He came out and had a great Monday night. I mean, I would assume you're happy that he's getting tosses from Holmes as opposed to whoever Tennessee was lining up, whether it was Billy Jeans or a sub. But you're looking at the Steelers, the Ravens, the Chiefs, Washington, Buffalo, Cowboys, Cincinnati, and Minnesota all as buyers in some way, shape, or form. Now, in some cases, it's more than one player, and I think the Steelers and Ravens have made a very key point that they're going for it on this one. Steelers even more interesting. They had one George Pickens, so they decided why not get two? You know, maybe they're going for the whole 3 and layup strategy of basketball, where it's either run game, which has been solid, or air it out because they can't really seem to throw the mid-rangers. Chiefs, we already talked about. Bills have been interesting because that one's been a couple weeks, and that's been up and down, even though the market value on that one, the amount of money they're paying that particular receiver in Cooper is probably going to work out. I think the weirdest one, I mean, Cincinnati going for a backup running back is smart, but, I mean, the Cowboys and Mingo? Kind of thought they'd be sellers, not buyers. Speaking of sellers, we have some people that we might assume. Now, these are also, the 2-win teams are very much represented. Just to point out, if you haven't noticed, every team in the league has at least 2 wins, which is quite a rarity at this point in time. That's New England, Miami, Cleveland, Jacksonville, Tennessee, Vegas, the Giants, and the Saints. And you're going to hear a couple of those names again because of the Browns, Vegas, you got Carolina, you got New Orleans, you got Tennessee, Jacksonville. They're all sellers. Throw Chicago in there too because they just got rid of some talent. And these are all teams that are looking to kind of make a change. Maybe some of them were teams that a couple weeks ago thought they might have a run, and I mean, even with Cleveland, now they have a quarterback who throws touchdowns. Unfortunately, he also throws a lot of interceptions. Congrats on that one, Winston. He passed the 100 mark. He now has 102 interceptions. The Saints, I mean, what a rough week because not only do you lose your primary wide receiver in Olave, but your quarterback's kind of riddled in a bit of an odd situation. A stat that came out that I think is hilarious that some people may have already looked at. If you look at starting quarterbacks after so many seasons, so starting quarterbacks with the most amount of losses after 4 seasons is actually Derek Carr. David Carr. I'm eventually going to get those right. David Carr after 4 seasons, after 5 seasons, and after 6 seasons. Once we get to 7 seasons, then he passes the baton off to Derek, the one who I keep calling David or Derek and whatever. And that's 8 seasons, 9 seasons, 10 seasons. And then in the 11th season, Derek Carr is currently tied with Archie Manning. Smart money says he might just pass him. But not only are you in that stat, but you also have to get just absolutely thrashed by one of your former wide receivers. So kind of a rough week all around, aside from the fact that you just got beat by one of those other now 2-win teams. The only team I didn't mention because they're a buyer and a seller, that's our good old Jets. We spent a lot of time talking about them anyway in the past couple weeks, but Rodgers essentially just gets what Rodgers wants. So he got his friend in at receiver who's doing okay and I think steadily better as the week goes on. And he got rid of this receiver he didn't like who ran routes that he didn't appreciate. He also who knows, maybe he won't even finish the season because now his buddy's probably also going to be the head of the CDC by the end of this thing, taking fluoride out of the water. But let's not make this political. I think we've had a rough enough day in general. And football is actually a nice discourse away from all that. Speaking of which, we do have a lot to talk about, and there's a bunch of stuff to look forward to week 10. So let's get right to our team week breakdowns. Doesn't happen often, but in this particular case, I'm skipping our top scoring team because they also played our bottom scoring team. So we'll get to them last as per usual. But in our first of many couple battles, congratulations to Fourth and Conquer. You took down our defending champions and looking to get a little bit of momentum here. I mean, Kate and Nick, you did have 125. That is good enough to win in some weeks. Realistically, we can look at your roster. I mean, I think you're probably your shining light here is Kelsey starting to come back into prominence and actually earning that top spot. He got 100 yards, and he was our tight end 3, so you got to be happy with that. But Cooper not getting the playing time, getting bumped out a little bit. I believe he was also a little bit hurt. He was predicted at that point for 0, so usually that's a scratch right before the game. And especially since had you been able to make that adjustment, you did have Sutton on the bench, who probably could have made the difference, although if we're playing that game, they did also have some options here against you. Fourth and Conquer did put together a solid outing here. They had our quarterback 1 in Joe Burrow. The receivers, you did great. Henry, running back 3. Your kicker was, the kicker 3. So aside from like Flacco kind of stinking it up and a middling performance at your flex here. But like I said, you did have some other options, so we can play the if and but game. Doesn't really matter. Kate and Nick, like I said, you're running out of weeks. You're probably going to want to start making your run. As opposed to Hale and Vincent, congratulations, 6-3. You're currently our second spot. They say all good things must come to an end, although I'm fairly certain that, Juliet, if you could have picked this maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, you would have rather dropped it, not this particular week, in the 3-headed dog, but is mainly the voice you probably heard was Paul. In fact, we all got to hear it on the chat group because apparently Daddy did win some football, but then we assume he slept on the couch. Congratulations, though. Big win for you guys. Put you in the top 4. Juliet and Lara, first place still, so don't worry so much. In terms of the matchups, it was not a low-scoring affair, so it was at least earned. The Raw Doggers, you did have the quarterback 2. And you also had our running back 5 in Brown, which has been kind of a huge pickup for you. Other quarterback wasn't so much of a slouch, even though both sides you kind of agreed to not really have your kickers or defenses make a huge impact. And certainly just even when you're underperforming, but not by that much, all right, you're going to save the grace. I think Pitts was obviously your only big disappointment. Juliet and Lara, I think one of the biggest things, as I mentioned in the intro, Olave getting knocked out and actually knocked out pretty hard if you watched it. That's now the number of concussions are starting to add up. That obviously didn't help you out. Now, you did still have Lamar, and Lamar is going to be Lamar. He was our quarterback 3. And you did have a smart play here. Hill is a boomer bust, and he was our tight end 5 on the week. So congrats there. But just not enough performance by some of the things that have been getting you there. You did have some ideas here on the bench, and actually had you put in one of these 2 receivers instead of Olave, obviously that would have made a massive difference. Not an easy call, though. Olave's been great for you so far, so you danced with who brung you, and unfortunately, that brought you to your first loss. Like I said, let's not be too panicky yet unless this starts to be a trend. And congratulations again, Paul. Hopefully you get off the couch at some point before week 10. Another battle of the households, and this one was down to the wire. This was having the look of being our Monday miracle, because if you looked at one point, Kelsey was a 40% chance to win. Raf was 60, and then it started to swing a lot. This was one where Kelsey were up 30 plus, but obviously the NorCan retirees here had our bottom tier here. They had Mahomes, kicker, and a defense left. The kicker and the defense did what you were hoping to, but finally Mahomes busted through. He hasn't had massive weeks. He was our quarterback 4 and putting up one of his best scores of the week. And then just consistently strong from your running backs was what you needed. Kelsey's did fight hard here, and you almost snuck one out. You did have Kamara, who was our running back 4. You had our defense 4. You also had our kicker 4, and not a lot of kickers that people started actually made the top 5 this week. Winston, you could have used without the 3 interceptions. The 1 touchdown was nice. That would have been a big difference. In fact, if we could just take a look at most things here, you did make a lot of the smart moves on the bench, as opposed to your husband's team, who left the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 4, that's Smith and Jigma and Hopkins respectively, on the bench. So this didn't have to be as close. But anytime you get down to between, under 4 points, always going to be kicking yourself. And especially when you have to be reminded again across the household of how you're doing. But it did come down to some pretty exciting Mondays. Hopefully you got to actually watch the game. I doubt it. I know it's a little bit later there, but still came down to it. Kelsey, you kind of needed the win, and you're going to need a couple runs here. Not out of the woods. I've done the math. You're more than fine. You just got to start winning. This was a huge one for you, gentlemen, however, hanging on to the top 6 spot, meaning technically, if the league ended today, you'd still make the playoffs. You know it's going well for you in fantasy when you can have an off week like this and still squeak out the win. Randy, congratulations. Not only was this the win, this was kind of our Monday night miracle. You were a 29% chance of winning going into it. Pamela had a 3.08 or 06 lead going into it with the kicker of all kickers here versus Cade Otten, a tight end who's gone up and down with this particular week. Obviously, he did more than enough. He was our tight end 2, so that was more than enough to make the difference. Now, Randy, you also did have some other performances, but oddly enough, nobody else in the top 5. Just a steady stream, and obviously, like I said, you were under your predicteds, but you did enough to get by. Obviously, Kyler Murray, I'd say, was probably your biggest one, although Chase has been having massive weeks recently, and he sure didn't here. Pamela, you put up an awesome fight. I mean, Saquon Barkley was our running back 2, and if anyone actually saw what he did, the reverse hurdle or the revertal as he jumped over somebody, go and Google it, or actually go and look up the players' reactions to it, because when athletes that are that insanely talented geek out over someone's move, it was crazy impressive. Even more impressive, you had Daniel Jones actually score you points this week. He was our quarterback 5. Unfortunately for you, though, it was an off week and you were riding commando. You didn't have a whole lot in your basement this week, so hopefully you can get healthy and come back. This gentleman right down here, McCaffrey, there are wins that he might be coming back sooner than later. Randy, you made all the right choices pretty much. You did have Roman Duze. He could have helped you out, but let's be honest. You got a 7-point win. I would take it. Top 3, I would definitely take it. Pamela, you're going to have to go into emergency mode here. You definitely want to make sure you try and string a few together to make this interesting. Unfortunately for Jackie, I do not believe had the top score in the week yet, and yet I did against her, and then she also had her horrible week. Although you can look at it this way, sometimes it's better. Had she had an amazing week and got 145 and lost, she'd be upset. At least she got the stinker out, and it was a stinker from top to bottom. A lot of your people who've been putting up top-end points just weren't for you this week when your defense was a low shining light, but then you look down and you actually did have the defense number 1 on your bench. Wouldn't have helped you out. I had the defense too. I also didn't really have massive performances from my quarterbacks, but I did have our running back 2, and I had our wide receiver 3, and that was more than enough to give me the top spot because I didn't really have too many downfalls. Now, crazy enough though, I could have pretty much put almost any combination out here and done well. I did actually have Dobbins, who was just outside of that top 5. Zay Flowers was in the top 5. He was the wide receiver 2, and he was sitting on the pine. Also, Dowdle had one of the few outstanding performances from the Cowboys this week. So I'll take it. Sorry, Jackie, but don't panic, because I was going to say in the end, you don't actually owe because you've already owned twice. This is another dead week, and our last dead week for a bit because you don't have anyone else with 2. So we know in week 10, at least someone's paying. There we can see the result. The 1 loss on the streak. The perfect season's over, but still Wouldn't be shocked if you clinched a spot still relatively soon. You got a couple points or a couple games on your next closest competitor, and just over 500 currently gets you in the playoffs. Now that's really going to come down to the next couple weeks. As I mentioned, the bottom teams here, you definitely have to go on a run. Although Kelsey and Jackie, I wouldn't panic too much. You've been scoring okay, so realistically, all you have to do is get some of the matchups you need, and then keep scoring high. So in terms of matchups, let's take a quick gander. Kelsey, you did draw me here, and we should have a tough one because I tend to go up and down. Jax is bouncing back to see if they can take down the giant killers of extremely exciting 1 versus 2. You don't get these very often. Will Jules and Lara bounce back, or was this loss just a sign of things to come? And then we do have, again, some people in the playoffs going against people who may need to make a run. So I imagine these are going to be pretty competitive as one. So as always, but even more so, you can count the number of weeks we have left. The bye weeks are back into it, so we definitely should be paying attention. This week looks like it's going to be pretty pivotal. Looking forward to week 10, we're back to the funky business. The Germans are getting a game, and we're going to Berlin. And what do we give our favorite German friends overseas? The Giants and the Panthers. So that's about as big of a middle finger as the NFL can give to an entire country at the same time. So best of luck staying away for that one. We also are back to bye weeks. We got the Packers, we got Vegas, we got Seattle, and we got the Browns. So if you have any of them, obviously you want to make some adjustments. Hopefully you already took a look at it because we're coming into some pretty pivotal weeks. As I mentioned, we just had a dead week, and it's going to be our last dead week for at least a week or two because everyone that's got 2 now has 3. So we definitely know there will be some drink spot after week 10. Who buys them? Are they celebration drinks? Are they very much appropriate to the season drinks where we just need a little bit of comfort? Only time will tell. But best of luck, everyone, heading into week 10.